Welcome everybody. It's been, my maths is really bad. It's been some time since our last community call back in December last year. I won't try and do the maths. I'm too tired for that. But delighted to have everyone join today. There's quite a lot to get through, so I will start at a pace, and apologies for moving at some pace through things. We want to talk about some high-level project updates that we've shared in the intervening time since the last call. Talk about the evaluator, especially the focus on the performance side of things, WebAssembly, and you working with other languages as well, modules updates, of which there are a number. Talk about QLang.org work and the docs and content work we're doing, as well as LSP, or as we're codenamed QPlease updates, release updates, and then finally community updates. So I will canter through this, but please just interrupt, or we can do questions at the end as we go. So firstly, project updates. What we've tried to do since the last community call is actually improve the way that we are running and, most importantly, communicating about the Q open source project. As we'll talk about as far as the evaluator and performance is concerned in a second, we slightly dropped the ball when it came to communicating where we were with the evaluator and especially performance improvements. And so that sort of enabled us to, or forced us effectively to just step back and think, all right, hang on a second, are we communicating in an effective way with the Q community? These community calls are great, but for a number of folks, sort of joining a call and listening to an update is quite a long form way of getting up to date on things. It works for some people, and that's absolutely great. And so we'll continue to do these. For others, the slide deck that we walk through as part of the community call is useful. But for others, they're actually slightly more interested in the detail of what are we working on, what's coming next, and what's in the backlog in sort of a more visual form. And so that's where we've come up with a proposal to use GitHub projects in a very lightweight way to do that, from like a project management, for want of a better phrase from our side, or any contributor side, that automatically then reflects with no effort required to something that approximates a roadmap to anyone who's interested in what it is we're doing as part of the Q project. So if you look at the Q project as a whole, we then break that down into a number of roadmap projects. And I've listed some of the parts of the project there that have roadmaps: the evaluator, modules, QPlease, the LSP, QLang.org, adapters, etc. And within those roadmaps, that's where, and we'll see this in a second, we have this focus on, well, what is coming next, what's in progress, and what's already done. Instead of using milestones for releases, and that because that was becoming very cluttered and actually hard to communicate the sequencing of things in a visual way, we've actually adopted release projects for this. So this is just a project that is dedicated to a specific release series. So we'll have a look at those in a second. There's a discussion 2846 that talks about this structure in a bit more detail. We want it to, it's an experiment for sure, and we want it to be quite lightweight, as in we've not spent a huge amount of time poring over the detail of this. We want to sort of be light on our feet as far as this is concerned and just respond to feedback. If people are saying, hang on, I'm still not getting a good sense for what you're doing in this area here, please let us know. It is still a work in progress. We're about 3 weeks into this new style of update here. And so we're just learning as we go. So feedback appreciated as we're going on this. Here is an example of the 0.8 release project, where here we're using the swim lanes to represent the different pre-releases and then ultimate release for 0.8. And for example, if there was a 0.8.1, that would also have a column here as well. As you can see, this is very modules heavy at the moment. That's largely because the modules project was the first roadmap project that we actually created, and then we started placing the modules things in the releases. It's worked incredibly well for the module side of things. As Daniel will cover shortly, we've done I want to say 4 or 5 alphas in the last month, and each of those has been driven through this release roadmap here, and it's worked incredibly well for us, sort of giving clear visibility to us on what is actually going into a release, and then automatically for free anybody else who might be interested in what's actually happening. And from the issue itself, you can also see it the other way around. You can see, well, is my issue targeted for a specific release or not? Yes or no. And you can see that automatically. So here is a roadmap project. So that was a release project. This is a roadmap project. And this is the docs and content roadmap. This is one of the more fleshed out. This is where we're planning what content goes into alpha.qlang.org and this is what Jonathan Matthews has mainly been focusing on here. This has quite a lot more detail in it. There's a very big backlog, but there's a very clear set of planned content here. This is the content that will go into alpha.qlang.org before we flip it live. I'll talk about when that's going to happen a bit later on. Ready means we sort of finesse the piece of content and it's ready to be actually, so the pen is ready to hit the paper, as it were, in terms of writing the piece of content. In progress, self-explanatory, as is done. There's quite a bit more that is done here. It's just that we've just added the new issues, as it were, to this roadmap, not the ones we've already done. Well, I'll talk in a bit about the new content that has landed since the last community call as well. So moving to the most important part in many ways of the Q project itself, that's the evaluator, and this includes any sort of discussion about performance as well. Marcel sends his apologies for today. He is deep in work on the evaluator, has a slightly croaky voice, and was very deep into looking at a particular performance issue and didn't want to break from it. Such was the level of context he'd loaded into his head. We did have an evaluator and performance office hours call last week, which Marcel joined. That is 2862. There are slides and a recording from that session available under that discussion issue there. And that office hours really came after there was a Slack thread, I think it was about 3 weeks ago, where a number of folks gave some very important but constructive feedback on the fact that they felt that performance in the evaluator had sort of been dropped by the wayside. They'd seen a lot of progress on the module side of things and not heard very much on the evaluator and the performance side of things. That was incredibly well-received feedback, and as I said, very constructive in the way that it was offered. It's very candid, and thank you to everybody who offered it. We took that opportunity to say, hang on a second, we have actually dropped the ball here on communication around the evaluator and performance. Not that we haven't been doing the work behind the scenes. That's exactly what Marcel has been doing. But from a communication perspective, we dropped the ball. The performance in Q discussion, 2857, the first link there, goes into a bit more detail. It's sort of explaining where we are, just sort of resetting baseline communication-wise in terms of what it is we're doing here. The evaluator and performance office hours then sort of provided an opportunity for folks who wanted to join, and thank you to those who did want to understand, okay, let's talk about this a bit more. Let's ask some questions, and Marcel provided a bit more of an update live in that situation. And just before that session as well, Marcel posted the first in what will be a fortnightly series of written updates. This is a very long one. The first one is going to be very long. Subsequent ones will be much shorter, where we're just providing a running commentary on the key progress on the evaluator and the performance side of things. So thank you again to those who provided that feedback. Hopefully we have met you effectively with improved communication on this, and look forward to sort of proving that actually the evaluator and performance work is making progress with updates, communication updates over the next few weeks and so, but also landing code as well. And let me just talk about that as well. But first of all, just a very brief reset. This is refresher, excuse me, on why are we even talking about a new evaluator? Why are we here? Marcel talks about this in more detail on the office hours that we had last week. The main headline is this, however. The old evaluator was too complex, and there are fundamental limitations in the implementation of it that just prevented us extending performance or improving performance any further. Bugs were harder to find and fix. So a number of things that made that undesirable. So Marcel sort of reuses the anecdote there where he heard from somebody that re-implementing something may be required as many as 7 times, and we're sort of approaching that number with the Q evaluator. But every single time we're learning key lessons from how, structurally speaking, the previous evaluator was limiting in some way, shape, or form. So the fundamental goal of the new evaluator is to fix the limitations and bugs of the old evaluator and enable all of those new kinds of optimizations and features. The key phrase there being enable. So the first commit of the new evaluator is not magically going to fix all bugs and all performance problems. We will likely see some improvement in areas, but fundamentally it's an architectural change that we need to hold it as that when it comes to these when it comes to finding opportunities for performance improvements and then proving them. I think I just saw a message go by from Rog jump in, please. I didn't see the message.
I was saying, like, one of the things that makes this possible and reasonable is that we actually have a fantastic set of regression tests, so that when we're writing this new evaluator, we actually do have good confidence that it is actually going to really work for people.
I couldn't agree more. And what I was going to say is, before I skip to that side there, thank you to those people who have submitted performance problems in the past, which we've then reduced to sort of reduced versions of those, or indeed Code to Unity, where we have also reduced performance problems there. Those performance problems we have now captured, or we have previously captured in tests that Roger's talking about, that we can then within the Q project itself in an entirely isolated way look to optimize. So again, our optimizations on the performance side of things are going to be guided by performance problems that are raised, Code and Unity going forward. Marcel flashed up this, talk through this slide, excuse me, and I'll just flash it up on screen here. This is where Marcel's now sort of getting very precise in terms of the tests, the large number of tests that we have in the Q code base as to how they are passing under the new evaluator. And so this is going to be the kind of level of update that Marcel will be providing going forwards when it comes to things like where we are with tests, whether they're passing, etc. And then we'll sort of shift into this gear of talking from a performance perspective as well. So critically speaking, this is a screenshot of this project. This is the evaluator roadmap project. It's one of those, as I said, that is a roadmap project that's part of the Q project, where we're looking to communicate in the key parts of the project. What are we doing? What's planned? What's in progress, etc. So the critical one here is 2884, the implementing of the new evaluator as the basis for performance and other improvements. This is a huge change that sits on top of an already massive stack of changes, the bulk of which have landed. Daniel, I think it may be as many as 30 or so changes, maybe even more, that have already landed in the Q code base. This one, or the issue that is related to it, sits on the top of those, and it's fundamentally the one that pulls it all together. Whilst the tests can be sort of behind the scenes, made to work with the new evaluator or the older evaluator, that doesn't mean we can actually, as users of Command Q or otherwise, actually enable the new evaluator. That's 2886. So the focus of Marcel's work at the moment is 2884, this top of stack change that enables or effectively pulls together all of the new evaluator changes. 2886 allows us, for example, via Command Q, to enable the new evaluator and start playing around with it. Marcel has a target for the end of March for both of these two being resolved. The other side of that, this is when, as we say in the performance and office hours session that we had last week, that's where the fun starts, because this is when we can turn on, there's no optimization of memory that is enabled by default at that point. The next thing is the enabling of those reuse buffers, which should see significant improvements in terms of the memory consumption from the new evaluator. So this is a step-by-step approach rather than a big bang, which is problematic for many reasons, least of all in engineering, but also from a testing and trying to bisect where an issue may have come in. Then we start building things up step by step here. And so this is where people having added Code to Unity, for example, is absolutely critical, because then we will be able to see if we've broken people before we land and release a change, for example. So if you're interested in being tightly coupled to the performance bandwagon and you haven't got your code in Unity, please let us know. We can happily sort of get on board with that. Then we can see much earlier that where these problems are coming in, whether they be correctness or performance issues, and help fix those much sooner. I think that's it on the evaluator and performance side of things. Hopefully I provided sort of a sufficiently good overview of what we covered last week on the evaluator and performance office hours. The one thing I didn't talk about but should have done is that we previously made the mistake of trying to communicate that performance changes would land in version 0.7. We talk about this in the office hours session last week. That was problematic from a communication perspective, not least because it meant we couldn't do a modules release with all the stuff we're doing on the modules side of things, because we were effectively blocked by the new evaluator work. So instead, what we're going to do is just be much more precise with these project updates here on what's in progress, and then, as you saw from the release roadmap earlier on, when these issues are going to land. So very soon, we'll actually target a specific release for 2884 and 2886 when we have clarity on what's happened with the version 0.8 series. But more on that once we've actually landed 0.8. Aram, can I hand over to you for WebAssembly and Q with other languages?
Yeah, sure. As a quick refresh of what we're trying to do with WebAssembly, essentially we want people to be able to write modules in different languages, modules which export functions, which then they can call from Q, essentially. So just like built-ins. And we want to do this ergonomically, and we want users to have the options to write their modules in any language they like. We've done a lot of work on WASM over the past couple of months, and the last feature we put in is the ability to pass structured data to WASM, basically concrete structs. But by doing so, we kind of hit the limitation of what's possible now with WASM before Sun's component model. So essentially, the WASM ecosystem is moving towards a new technology. Let's call it, they call it a component model, which is essentially an ABI that allows to do this sort of thing well, essentially WASM modules well from any language and so on and so on. But component model is not ready yet. And not only component model is not ready yet, Go itself, which is definitely one of the languages that we want to support, is missing critical features that essentially makes it impossible to use for Q at the moment. For example, there's the ability to export functions. And there's a proposal that's being worked on right now. So essentially, there's not much that we can do at this point until the WASM technology evolves, becomes more mature, specifically the component model. That's what we're waiting for. But even before component model, there's not much we can do until Go gets the ability to export functions, which is at least 3 months from now. So that's what we're doing with WebAssembly. That's what we can do at this point. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yes. So one of the most requested feature of Q from the very beginning was the ability to use Q as a library from other languages, for example, Python and so on. And we didn't have any way of doing that, so we're trying to fix this problem. And we're thinking of exposing an API roughly equivalent to the top-level Q API. So that means basically no QAST support or no Q load support and so on, just what you get from the top-level Q package. We want to have that sort of functionality available from other languages. And we're doing this by exposing a C API using essentially build mode C shed from Go. So a C API supporting what I just said, and then we're going to implement higher level libraries that utilize this C API. And for various reasons, we're starting with Java, and all of this is going to land very soon. So now we're working on the C API itself and the Java API. After Java, Python will be the next target. We don't know exactly what other languages will support. We're waiting for community input on that, what would they like supported. Of course, with a C-compatible API, people could do their own integrations and so on, or they could contribute and so on. And of course, we're going to do some tutorials to explain to people how they're going to use these APIs from different languages and so on. Yeah.
Perfect. I think the key part there being that we want to drive this based on, as Aram said, real-life examples. Those get surfaced in the tutorials, and it's almost like we're working backwards from those examples. And so when we actually share the experimental versions of Java and Python libraries, then we'll start to iterate a bit harder on what those examples should look like, and we can then use a good feedback loop with folks who are actually using them to say, oh, hey, I'd really like to be able to do X here, or how do I do Y from Java? So then we can take it from there. Great, thanks, Aram. Modules. Rog, am I handing to you?
I believe you are. So yeah, so we've been doing lots of stuff around modules in Q recently over the last few months. And just as a brief refresher, modules in Q are like modules in Go. They're a collection of packages that are bundled together as a unit that can be fetched across the network. And we actually now have an experimental implementation of modules available in the latest alpha release. And we are working on the experimental version of a central registry, so a place where anyone could upload modules to and make them available to other people. The storage, the underlying storage protocol that we're using is based around OCI containers, OCI registries, which are widely deployed and used for distribution of other artifacts, notably Docker containers, but all sorts of other things are using them now. So it's a fairly standard protocol, and there are lots of implementations, which comes with its own warts, of course, because they all have their own little limitations and that sort of thing. But what we're doing, we're trying to make it compatible with all the registries we can find out, and we've had some great feedback from people saying, oh, it doesn't work for one reason or another, which has caused us to iterate a bit on what features we provide. And to be clear, the Q modules are very similar in lots of ways to Go modules. They differ in that particular respect, that they're not they're not based around VCS systems. They're based around registries, but other than that, there's lots are similar. And one of the things that is different from Go is that aspect of the design means that it makes it much easier to support private modules, custom registries, and that kind of thing, without necessarily those all fit into the scheme. Next slide.
Could I just jump in quickly there to emphasize that last point really hard, is that we talk about an experimental version of the central registry a bit higher up the slide, but just to emphasize Roger's last point there, there's nothing that ties Q modules in any way to the central registry. They should work with any OCI registry. And indeed, I think what are the registries that we've already seen folks trying this out with, Rog? AWS, GitLab. Yeah. So folks are already trying either with Google Cloud, so within their company or in indeed in a public setting, folks are already using Q modules with these different types of registries. The central registry that we're working on there is like a convenience place for public modules, a well-known place that people can go to for public modules, and a an authoritative source of truth for those public modules. Because public modules, for example, with schemas that are well-known and should be well-distributed to folks, that's what we're aiming for the central registry there. We did a demo on that, I think, a couple of updates ago, Rog? So if folks want to see the demo that we did there, you almost blink and you miss the demo because it was quite so seamless in terms of logging into GitHub and then just transparently using the central registry from the QCLI. Sorry, Roger, I'll hand back to you.
Yes, so there's a bunch of aspects of this that have landed. So currently with the experimental, you have to set, actually one thing we should have said is none of this works unless you set the environment variable Q experiment equals modules. And with that enabled, all the Q subcommands now work, support fetching and loading modules. There are some new commands, like you can do qmod tidy, which will fetch and update your dependencies, much like go mod tidy. We've got very recently qmod get to update dependencies. And we've also got qmod publish, which is for publishing to a registry, whether it's your own custom registry or the central registry. That works. So use the same command for both. And one thing that we didn't have in the original design, but is now the case, is that you can have a configuration file that actually says some aspects of how for a particular registry, how modules are stored there. And that's necessary because registries have certain registry implementations, or deployments have specific restrictions. Like, for example, you can only have one repository. And we, in the original design, we had one OCI repository per module, which is nice because then you see the module names inside your repository. And there are all sorts of restrictions on the repository name, but that's a nice one. But sometimes that's not possible. So in that case, you can specify that, for example, the modules are stored with the hash of the name rather than the actual name, and it was stored as tags. And there's a few different options there, and there probably will be more as we uncover more restrictions and quirks of other registries. We now support a disk-based module cache. So when you evaluate, it doesn't fetch if it doesn't need to. And as a kind of transitionary step, we support the old local packages inside your module alongside modules. If there's any ambiguity, then we give an error, but that provides some kind of transitionary scheme. So you can have, for your main module at any rate, you can have your generated code and you can import modules from the network at the same time. Yep, those are directories inside QMod, as Daniel says. And we also now add, like QMod tidy and QMod init now adds a language version field to the module.q file, and that's really important because that in the future will enable us to make backwardly incompatible changes by, for example, by looking at the language version and saying, if you're above a particular version, then you shouldn't be using a deprecated feature. So that's going to be really useful in a future looking sort of way. Next slide. So we've also improved the documentation in various ways. We've got a nice modules tutorial now, which walks through pushing and using modules to your own custom registry. With a couple of help pages on the new environment variables that are supported and the registry configuration I talked about a moment ago, and like a runnable Go example in QLoad, which actually shows how you can use the Go API, because the Go API is now supports modules. This is very recent again, that so you can actually provide your own implementation, and that all comes that's all triggered through the registry field inside the load.config, which you can provide your own registry implementation to, so that you can basically customize everything if you want. But there's also a high-level API which enables you to get all the functionality that the Q command uses for loading modules and using the configuration files. So that should be, and that actually happens by default when modules are enabled. So the using QLoad with modules should be now very seamless. You should get all the functionality that the Q command gets out of the box for free. There's a nice screenshot of the start of the module registry, the custom module registry tutorial. Go to the alpha.qlang.org to check it out. And I think that's, oh yeah, we have module feedback sessions. Come along, put your oar in. It's useful to have those discussions, and that will be going on a every couple of weeks basis.
Yep. We've had some phenomenal feedback. The first of these changes around modules landed just before Christmas, just after Christmas. I forget exactly when. And instantly we had people trying and giving feedback on the module side of stuff. There's been a phenomenal amount achieved on the module side of things. So huge congratulations to Roger, Daniel, but most importantly, a huge thank you to those people who've been trying this stuff, giving us feedback with, as Roger said, these different OCI endpoints. That has been phenomenal. That's actually enabled us to quickly fix things, quickly get releases out, and as Daniel said, do 1 alpha per week over the last month. So it has been a phenomenal turnaround, and that's really because folks have been right on it, giving us feedback and stuff. So thank you.
I just say I'll reiterate that the fact that people are actually trying this stuff on real registries is great for giving us the confidence to know that this stuff is really working on real registries, because we've built all the packages for one reason or another, for some fairly good reasons, but we've built all the client libraries for talking to the OCI protocol, or we've built that all from scratch. So having the confidence that really works, all the authorization stuff when talking to real registries is like super useful when people come back and say, yep, this doesn't work. And like, for example, we've that's caused us to raise issues with upstream registries to fix things and that kind of thing. So it's really great having that feedback from people using it.
And validation of the fact that the OCI module that you talked about that we've developed, Roger, is that other projects are starting to pick that up and use it as well now. So that's good, is that hopefully forms a good basis for others writing Go programs that communicate with OCI repos as well. OCI registries, I beg.
Yeah, I'll say just that particular module is written absolutely with that. I mean, it's written to be used by Q, of course, but it's written to be entirely independent and useful. It should be very lightweight, useful for all kinds of situations. So if you're working with OCI registries, for example, it provides an in-memory OCI server implementation that isn't really provided by anything else, which is incredibly lightweight. You can start it up in a few microseconds. Yep. So that's pretty useful, I think.
Super. Thank you. I'll pick up on the qlang.org and docs and content side of things. Just a brief refresher, last time when we spoke on the docs and content call, we talked about the old qlang.org, which is still the current qlang.org, just lacking content, being out of date, a number of things, not really community driven in terms of the content that's being on there. And a large part of the reason is that that's so hard is that it's actually very difficult to maintain content on there. As well, we actually had some good feedback from Kelsey Hightower, who said that actually you don't want to try and clutter too much onto your main documentation side, have like a core language and fundamentals part, and then sort of have a separate area and build that out organically where you have things driven by example. This has actually been a very good experiment so far, because alpha.qlang.org, we've added a lot of content to, and we'll talk about that in a second. But Q, by example, is actually being picked up by folks who use, for example, BuildKite. And they said, oh, I spotted that I can use Q to drive my BuildKite pipelines. This is fantastic. And so we want to continue to organically build out the Q by example side of things. But our focus over the last 3 months especially has been on alpha.qlang.org and getting that finally live. We've added a number of new areas of content, and I'll talk in a second about the fact we had a docs and content call yesterday that covered this in a bit more detail. But across all of these areas here, Rog just flashed up on screen earlier on the modules tutorial that exists. There are a number of other bits of content there. I don't know how many. I think it may be north of about 30 pieces of content since the last call. And we're now getting it into a position where actually we can generate these bits of content, especially around modules, for example, very, very easily. So we already have a piece of content lined up for showing how to use the Go API with modules. Here, for example, is one of those pieces of content, and this was very well received. Jonathan interacted with Stefan Prodan and others in Slack, where there was some discussion around nuances or sort of vagaries about aliases and reference scopes. That discussion on Slack was phenomenal, as so many of the discussions on Slack are. And what we did from that is say, this is a great conversation. How can we actually distill this into a piece of content? And 24 hours later, we had this piece of content up there, which walks through in a guided way, essentially using the questions as they were asked in the Slack thread. And this is what we're referring to as a concept guide, which is a bit more of a learning sort of at your own leisure type piece of content here. And this worked out really nicely. The fact as well that we have got automated testing behind our docs and content as well now also means that we can write a piece of content with confidence and know that with every subsequent Q release that comes out, we will be told if something gets broken in some way, shape, or form. So we can now, for want of a better phrase, churn out content with a very high degree of confidence, and that's been absolutely critical. And it will be even more critical as the evaluator and the performance changes come along as well. Especially, for example, as we start to improve error messages, we need to make sure our content on qlang.org, as it will be, reflects that. So when does alpha.qlang.org go live? The answer is we're aiming to flip the switch before KubeCon EU on the 20th of March. So less than 15 days. We have the homepage pretty much ready to go. It's just waiting for the final bit of design here or there. Jonathan is working hard on the content to ensure that we have sort of good connectivity and linking off the front page. Main goal here is to get this thing live, get rid of the old qlang.org, and then we iterate and improve on things live. And so then we can just sort of kindly put the old qlang.org to bed and get the new version of the site live and take it from there. So that is the goal. I put this up on screen earlier on. This is the roadmap from the docs and content perspective. Jonathan is busy working through this. As I said, that we had a docs and content call yesterday. If folks are interested in contributing in any way, and Cedric very kindly joined yesterday and shared some wonderful ideas on how we should be holding content within the new qlang.org site. Absolutely great feedback. And if there's ways in which folk thinks we aren't surfacing answers properly, that kind of feedback is worth its weight in gold. And so we can look at different ways of visualizing the site or navigating through it. We have hopefully got a solid building block, sort of foundation, for want of a better phrase, for adding new content, though, with then looking at different ways to visualize that as being like a refinement. I talked about the docs and content call from yesterday. There it is. It's linked from discussion 2863. We'll share the slides here so you can click through to it, where, as I said, we talked in a bit more detail about the new content, but also gave a brief demo of how content creation works as well. I can very quickly give the next update as well, which is on qplease, or the LSP, Language Server Protocol. If you recall from the last community call, we had an update, which was the goal to have a minimal working server by the end of 2023. We missed that by a couple of days. I think it was the 3rd or the 4th of January, where I actually completed a working version, had a change with a working version of qplease. So I missed it by 3 days, but it's great. It builds a lot on what the GoPlease team have already done, and we've repurposed large part of it for qplease, which is fantastic. And we shipped an initial version of that in Alpha 3. And so qplease is now actually part of the quotes Q distribution as a separate binary. Just a brief note on that, it's just a separate binary for now, whilst we actually work on sort of qplease in an experimental capacity. We are roughly planning to drop it as a separate binary, though, and make it part of the Q command itself as a subcommand, so that then you only just have to have a single very lightweight command on disk to do anything Q related, including having Q work as part of your editor as well. So what can the LSP do today? I put editor highlighting in brackets there because this is a very just contentious thing when it comes to the separation between LSPs and what editors actually do when it comes to highlighting. We're not going to try and rock the boat too much here. Most editors, VS Code especially, and NeoVim have some sort of native editor-specific highlighting that uses things like text make grammars. We're not going to try and tackle that day one. We could do with things like Tree Sitter, but we don't need to focus on that for now. Instead, the only method we have implemented right now is format. That is the easiest one to do. And we have a whole lot of infrastructure that is reused as part of GoPlease, including an integration testing framework. And having worked on GoPlease in the early days, I can say that having an integration test framework day one is going to save us massively when it comes to actually implementing methods, other methods down the line. It'll be easy to reproduce bugs that people have and then fix them and prove them as fixed with integration tests. GoPlease didn't have integration tests until quite late in the day. And so we are really benefiting from the work that the GoPlease team have done there. We also have support for remote instances of an LSP server as well. That's not necessarily a remote machine, but just a single shared instance on a machine between multiple editor clients. That is a huge benefit when it comes to things like caching. Ultimately, I think we might move to a model where we could have a truly remote instance of an LSP with the protocol spoken over the wire, but that's not going to be a focus for some time. What's next? VS Code plugin and NeoVim plugin. I have been promising to get to these for the last couple of weeks, but with focus on performance and modules, that has slipped down slightly. But again, prior to KubeCon EU, that is still the goal. We're also working with the author of the IntelliJ plugin, and he is going to help us build out integration between that plugin and qplease as well. So the IntelliJ plugin will hand off to qplease or our LSP implementation for things like go to definition, completion, etc. So as we make progress with qplease, i.e. the main QLSP, not only will VS Code, NeoVim, and sort of LSP aware or native editors be able to take advantage of those improvements, so will IntelliJ as well. So look forward to sharing more on that. We just had a call on that today. We will be starting sort of regular, possibly fortnight calls on Qplease and LSP and updating the project board to reflect actually what we're working on. The focus of that is going to be go to definition to start with and completion. Then we'll have formatting, go to definition and completion, and that feels like a pretty good starting point from an implementation perspective, and look forward to others if they would like to contribute, helping out in that respect as well. Here is a screenshot of the IntelliJ plugin, which reminds me that we need to update the logo for this plugin to the new style, new color Q logo. But this is, just great to be working with Joachim, who's the author of this plugin. Then there's a bit more. We need to move the VS Code plugin to the Qlang organization. Possibly also pick up on 1921, which is moving the tree sitter implementation from Eon Patapon to the main Q organization as well. It's possible that we might even be able to leverage that tree sitter declaration as like a source of truth for other things, including syntax highlighting. But that will probably be something that happens down the line. As I said, above all, we need to improve the project board. The project board has also not received any attention over the last couple of weeks from me, so I need to give that a bit of love as well. I will stop talking and hand over to Daniel. Release updates.
Yep. So like Paul said, we've done quite a lot of releases in the last month, and we now organize those releases via GitHub project instead of milestone. There's reasons for that, but to summarize, it just gives us more flexibility, and it also a milestone is basically just a bag of issues, right? It's not as useful. So we did 0.7.1, which was basically a rebuild of 0.7.0 for Go 122. The reason being because otherwise QCat Go would panic in some scenarios. It's an upstream bug, but still we need to work around it. Then the first alpha of 0.8 was the first experimental release with Q modules. The second alpha we had to skip because we made a configuration error in a release automation, believe it or not. Then alpha 3 is what added the Q registry configuration file that Roger talked about. And we also added QMod registry for local testing of an in-memory registry, and also the first cut of Qplease as a binary, as a program that you can run. Alpha 4 was what added module supporting Qload for the Go API users. And then Alpha 5, which happened just yesterday, is what added QModget to update and in some cases even downgrade dependencies. But it's all explained in the documentation if you run the help command. And then we aim for the first and hopefully only release candidate early next week, and then the final release next week. And as a recap, the plan is to do releases more often and to just carry forward. And if something isn't ready for a release, such as, for example, Marcel's first cut of the experimental Neo evaluator for people to try, then it's not the end of the world. We'll just do another set of alpha releases for 0.9. There's no point in just dragging on and delaying releases and then not be able to release other stuff that is ready.
Wonderful.
And then in the next, in this next slide, you can see one of the views in the project that I was toying with this morning is a view of all the tags that we have already done and are upcoming. And this is kind of what you could see if we used milestones as well. So you can do views like that with projects. And all of this is public. So if you follow the link from the previous slide, you should be able to see all of this.
Perfect. Thank you. Dominic, community updates. Thank you. You're on mute, Dominic.
So, thank you very much. The first update, I mean, we've seen it in the previous slides, is the GitHub project view per effort, which is basically a way to show the roadmap of any given effort project at any given time. So it's basically based on the very good feedback in Slack recently, and now we're able to show where one wants to go with modules, LSP, and the evaluator at any given time. So I think this will be a continuous source of truth for the future. And still more on like the daily discussions are still going on GitHub discussions and the Slack channels. The activity is great. So those are like the main channels where we see activity. What we also want to do and have done in the last few months already, but we wanted to increase that, is just like personal direct calls to understand really of individual users, their use cases, pain points, feedback, ideas when it comes to Q. We address a lot, I think, in those calls with those GitHub project views, with GitHub discussions, but there's still, as we've learned, a lot happening that is not visible there. And we really would like to understand, to really go into direction, account for that in the future, in future considerations and in development. So if you have something, if you want to set up a call, if you're here in the call, or if you're watching the recording, just please reach out to me. And another thing is, obviously, we want to add users of Q to the website. We already have done so in the past few weeks, and it just gives credibility to the project. So if you want to see your logo on the website, also please feel free to reach out to me. Next slide. So speaking of interactions, Daniel and Paul will be at KubeCon Paris in 2 weeks. Again, this is a great opportunity to talk, to learn about your project, about your use case, about your pain points. So feel free to reach out directly to them. And next slide.
I'll just briefly say, if you don't mind, we have a number of folks we already know we're meeting at KubeCon. So please, let's just chat in Slack and try and coordinate. For example, Nick Cope from the Crossplane project. Oh, that's a tongue twister. I knew I was going to get that wrong. Nick Cope from the Crossplane project. Goodness me, I was hoping not to trip over that. There's been some really interesting work that some users of Crossplane have been doing to write composition functions in Q, as an example. Nick and I are going to be catching up on that. It's that kind of thing where, when I was at KubeCon in North America last year, so many of those conversations just happened ad hoc when out on the sort of the solution showcase, chatting to folks. But if you would like to sit down and chat through what it is you're doing with Q, or any of the updates we've provided today, really happy to. Please just let myself, Daniel, know, and we can book in some time, because it's likely to be a busy couple of days when we're there.
Okay. And while there is now the GitHub project view, there will still be regular update calls, regular written updates on those efforts outlined here. With that being said, this is very, I would say, fluid, because this might change within months, right? Because this is all based on the community needs and what's important right now. Because like a few weeks ago, the evaluator and performance updates were not there yet, but if this is needed, we will put it on there. So this table might change regularly.
Cool. A very brief summary of what's next. The evaluator, enabling the new evaluator via an experiment, performance improvements guided by Unity and performance issues that have been reported. On the module side of things, the experimental support that will be released in the final version 0.8 release, and an experimental central registry. QPlease, or the LSP, VS Code, NeoVim, and IntelliJ plugins around an initial server implementation. Qlang.org, finally the launching of alpha.qlang.org, more examples on Q-by-example, which showcases how Q can be used in various integrations. Cross-language Q, as Aram said, experimental Java and Python wrappers around a C API of the core Q evaluator. So that's a summary version of where we are. I'm very aware that we have taken a long time providing an update here, and so I will be very quiet and listen humbly to any questions that people might have. Yes, apologies. It was we will do a community call on a more regular cadence next time so that it's not so fully loaded. Kevin, thank you very much. And Steve, you've got a question.
I've wondered about the tree sitter project, because I had mistakenly started implementing a grammar myself and then gave up when I found the common one. How do you validate the fidelity in it? How do we make sure that it's just as good as whatever, parsing Q with Q's own library?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think it's something that's actually talked about when I was talking to Joachim earlier on about the IntelliJ plugin. because that has a similar situation where there is an eBNF style grammar that informs what IntelliJ does, and they do a lot of code generation off the back of that grammar. And then, of course, you've got the question, well, in that situation, how do we ensure that that grammar matches what Q does? For the Q parser itself, we have we don't have a grammar as a source of truth. And instead, it is the actual Q implementation itself that is the source of truth, and the spec follows that. So ultimately, that's not necessarily a great situation to be in. I think, as I saw Daniel flagging there, that testing is a very good way to mitigate against differences there, especially when of sort of validating that you don't have errors in some situations or do in others. Fuzzing, absolutely. Could we move to a situation where we have a single source of truth, where one of those grammars informs the others? Possibly. I think there would be perhaps a disproportionate amount of effort. Having spoken to Joachim this afternoon about the IntelliJ side of things, he said that actually their grammar is sort of like an enhanced grammar that helps give hints within the IntelliJ code generation process for where they can then automatically handle errors in the syntax tree. And that actually comes back to something that we're going to have to solve within the LSP as well, is that just imagine you're writing some Q. How often do you leave a file sort of in progress where there's a syntax error? Or maybe you're doing completion and you want to say X dot and then say, well, complete. Well, syntactically, the file at that point in time is actually an error. And yet you're expecting the LSP to do something useful to you and offer you a completion at that point in time. I will ask Aram to remind me, there's a brilliant blog post that he referenced on how we can have more resilient parsers in this situation. IntelliJ already has this for free based on their sort of extended grammar. So all of these things, Steve, are sort of related. Not totally clear to me how we should sequence this. Not totally. Oh, Aram has very kindly shared the blog post as well. I'll let him just chime in on it in a second. Not totally clear to me what we should be solving for right now, or the sequence of things. If you or anyone else has got ideas and wants to chip in, would be wonderful.
I may be confusing things, Aram, you'll probably know this. I thought that one of the selling points with TreeSitter was that it was fairly resilient. In other words, it could recover and give an indication that there was, say, a bad segment in the middle of a file and pick up afterward. But I might be confusing with something else. I'll check out this URL.
Sure, but I think that the difficulty is not necessarily like doing a resilient parser, but like having this sort of resilient or like a parser with error recovery or something like that. That's also used in like the main implementation, because it's essentially exposes a different API than what a normal compiler wants, and making this the same thing in both cases, that's the difficult part.
100%. So you sort of see, Steve, there's like a number of different things to be solving for you. Maybe it'll become a bit clearer as we make a bit more progress with the LSP itself. For now, for full transparency, we're going to do what Go does, so Go follows a similar approach where their reference is not a grammar file that is then code generated from. It's the Go packages, the core Go packages themselves. That Go Please uses those, so it doesn't reinvent a parser, so you have that consistency of experience, because obviously that would be weird if you didn't. But what that means is, because the parser is not very good and tolerant of errors, they have to do this sort of second phase of fix-up within Go Please, and we'll do the same initially within Q Please, until such time as it becomes clear, exactly as Aram said, well, should we fix the core Q parser or should we do something else? If we do something else, we're in the situation that you're talking about of, well, then how would you ensure consistency between the core Q parser? So you could sort of see this like a bit of a messy space, but hopefully, as Daniel indicated, through testing, fuzzing, etc., we get to a situation where we have pretty much consistency amongst all of these things, including things like syntax highlighting within the various editors. That is effectively like an extension of the same problem, but if you squint really hard. So
great, looking forward to
super
it.
question.
Thanks.
Great.
Also, I will note it's somewhat related, like the F# and the C# compilers in the Microsoft land they don't use LSP. Whatever the technology has that does the same thing, they use the actual compiler for driving that technology. So there is the possibility of doing that also with different trade-offs and stuff like that.
Stunned everybody into silence, or as Daniel suggested, put them to sleep. If anybody does have any questions they want to follow up with afterwards, really happy to do so in the GitHub discussion that announced today's session. We promise that this update will be shorter. Or Slack, indeed. We promise this update will be shorter. We promise we will do these things more regularly. And hopefully, off the back of the changes in the way we're communicating about the project, there can be a lot more self-serve as well. But for those who would like to join on the next community call, look forward to chatting then, where we will give you much more time to talk rather than listening to us. But until then, thank you very much, and chat to you next time.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
See you then.